The ice stretched endlessly in every direction, a white wasteland that reflected the pale light of 3 distant suns. Captain Marcus Chen pressed his face against the frosted window of the emergency shelter, watching the storm rage outside. His breath formed small clouds in the frigid air despite the shelter's failing heating system. 3 weeks. 3 weeks since the transport ship Wanderer had crashed on this frozen moon orbiting the gas giant Kepler 442b. 3 weeks since he'd watched his crew of 47 die one by one from the cold, the thin atmosphere, and the toxic gases that seeped from cracks in the ice. Now only Marcus remained, along with the most unlikely companions he could have imagined. A deep rumble echoed through the shelter, followed by a sound like breaking glass. Marcus turned from the window to see the largest of his companions struggling to stand. The creature was magnificent and terrifying at once, nearly 12 feet tall when upright, with scales that shimmered between deep blue and silver. Its wings, folded tight against its body, spanned at least 20 feet when extended. Ancient amber eyes, larger than Marcus's fist, fixed on him with an intelligence that made his spine tingle. The aliens called themselves the Zephyrani, though Marcus had taken to thinking of them as dragons. It seemed fitting. They breathed a form of controlled plasma instead of fire, their bodies were covered in natural armor, and they possessed a grace that belied their massive size. Most importantly, they were dying just as surely as he was. Veltar grows weaker, said Silas, the smallest of the group, though still twice Marcus's height. The dragon's voice resonated through the shelter like distant thunder, produced by vocal cords that had evolved on a world with much denser atmosphere. The cold poison spreads through her system. Soon she will enter the final sleep. Marcus looked at Veltar, the dying dragon. Her breathing had become labored over the past 2 days, each exhale producing less of the warm plasma that had been keeping them all alive. Without her heat generation, they would all freeze within hours. The other 4 dragons, Silas, Karath, Thymel, and Jackson, were already showing signs of the cold sickness. Their scales had lost their luster, their movements had become sluggish, and their internal fires burned dimmer each day. How long? Marcus asked, checking the portable medical scanner he'd salvaged from the wreckage. The device wasn't designed for alien physiology, but it could detect basic life signs and temperature variations. Perhaps 2 days, Karath replied, the oldest and largest of the group. His massive head turned toward the ceiling where ice crystals had begun forming despite their shared body heat. The cold here is unlike anything our kind has experienced. Our homeworld of Zephyros maintains temperatures that would boil your blood, human. This frozen wasteland is as alien to us as the heart of a star would be to you. Marcus nodded grimly. He'd learned much about the Zephyrani during their weeks together. They came from a volcanic world where temperatures rarely dropped below what humans would consider lethal heat. Their biology was adapted for extreme warmth, their blood was a superheated plasma that circulated through organs designed to process sulfur and other chemicals that would be toxic to most life forms. The cold of this moon wasn't just uncomfortable for them, it was fundamentally incompatible with their existence. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus that he, a human, was the most cold-adapted of their little group. While the dragon slowly froze to death, he was merely uncomfortable. His species had evolved on a world with moderate temperatures, and human technology had long ago solved the problems of extreme environments. If only he had access to that technology now. Tell me about your ship again, Marcus said, settling down next to Silas. The dragon's body radiated warmth like a living furnace, and Marcus had learned to position himself carefully to benefit from their heat without getting close enough to be accidentally burned by their plasma breath. The flame of Zephyros lies buried beneath the avalanche, approximately 2 kilometers from here, Thymel replied. Unlike the others, she was smaller and more delicate in build, with scales that held flecks of gold among the blue. The impact drove her deep into the ice. Even if we could reach her, the cold has likely damaged her systems beyond repair. Our technology requires specific temperature ranges to function. But she might have emergency supplies? Heating elements? Anything that could help? Jackson, who had been silent for most of the day, raised his great head. There are emergency thermal cores designed to maintain minimum operating temperatures for critical systems. If they survive the crash and the cold, they might provide enough heat to sustain us for a few more weeks. A few more weeks until what? Marcus asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. Are you expecting rescue? The dragons exchanged glances, a subtle communication that Marcus had learned to recognize over their time together. Finally, Korath spoke. No, human Marcus. We were an exploration vessel, sent to investigate the strange energy readings from this system. Our disappearance will not be noted for several months. By the time search vessels are dispatched, we will be long dead. Marcus stood and walked back to the window, staring out at the swirling snow. The storm had been raging for 6 days now, with winds that could knock a man flat and visibility measured in mere feet. Even if they could somehow reach the crashed ship, attempting the journey in these conditions would be suicide. But staying here was suicide too, just slower. What about your emergency beacon? Marcus asked. Surely you have some way of calling for help. Damaged in the crash, Silas replied sadly. As was yours, I suspect, or you would have used it by now. Marcus nodded. His ship's beacon had been destroyed when the Wanderer broke apart during atmospheric entry. A cascade failure in the FTL drive had dumped them out of hyperspace directly in this system's gravity well, with no chance to make a controlled landing. He'd been lucky to reach the escape pods, luckier still to find this automated research station that provided basic shelter. The research station had been his salvation and his prison. Built by some long-gone civilization to monitor seismic activity on the moon, it provided protection from the elements but little else. The power system was failing, the heating was minimal, and the food synthesizers had broken down within the first week. He'd been slowly starving when the dragons arrived, their own ship suffering a similar fate to his. That had been 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks of the most unlikely partnership in galactic history. You know, Marcus said slowly, an idea beginning to form in his mind. My species has a saying. Where there's a will, there's a way. Explain, Korath rumbled. Marcus turned from the window, his mind racing. We've been thinking about this wrong. We keep talking about why we can't reach your ship, why the technology won't work, why we're all going to die. But what if we approached it differently? What if instead of accepting our limitations, we found ways to work around them? You speak in riddles, small one, Thymel said, though there was curiosity in her ancient eyes. What do you propose? I propose we stop waiting to die and start fighting to live. Marcus moved to the center of the shelter, his excitement growing. You say your ship's thermal cores might still be functional. You say the storm makes travel impossible. You say the cold will kill you before we can get there. All of those things might be true. But humans have a long history of doing impossible things. Veltar stirred, her great eyes opening for the first time in hours. Speak your thoughts, Marcus of the humans. Even if they prove futile, hope is a warmer companion than despair. Marcus looked at each of the dragons in turn, seeing something he hadn't noticed before, not just resignation, but expectation. They were watching him with the intensity of beings who had heard something in his voice that they recognized. Not confidence, exactly, but determination. The same determination that had driven humans to spread across the galaxy despite being one of the younger species in the galactic community. Your people evolved on a hot world, Marcus said. Mine evolved on a cold one. Your technology works with heat, mine works with cold. Your ship is buried in ice, which is my element. You're dying from the cold, but I'm still functional. He paused, letting the implications sink in. We're not 5 separate beings trying to survive. We're a team, and each of us brings something the others need. Continue, Korath said, and Marcus could hear the growing interest in his voice. The storm won't last forever. When it breaks, I can make the journey to your ship. I'm small enough to move through spaces you can't access, and cold-resistant enough to survive the trip. If the thermal cores are intact, I can retrieve them and bring them back here. The distance is too great for you to travel alone, Jackson objected. 2 kilometers through ice and snow, carrying heavy equipment, in sub-zero temperatures. You would die long before reaching us again. Marcus smiled grimly. That's where the teamwork comes in. I won't be going alone, and I won't be making the return trip on foot. The dragons looked puzzled, but Marcus was warming to his theme now. The plan was crazy, probably impossible, but it was better than sitting here waiting to die. Silas, you're the smallest and most agile of your group. Could you fly in this atmosphere, even for short distances? The dragon considered the question carefully. The air is thin and cold, but, yes, I believe I could manage short flights. Why do you ask? Because you're going to be my transport back from the ship. I'll go out when the storm breaks, retrieve what we need, and signal for pickup. You fly out, grab me, and bring me back before I freeze to death. This plan has many points of failure, Karoth pointed out. What if you cannot reach the ship? What if the thermal cores are damaged? What if Silas cannot reach you in time? Then, we die, Marcus said simply. But we die trying instead of waiting. And humans are very good at trying. Over the next several hours, they refined the plan. Marcus would wait for the storm to clear, then make his way across the ice using improvised cold weather gear and navigation equipment salvaged from both ships. He would follow the path of disturbed ice and snow that marked where the flame of Zephyros had carved its way into the moon's surface during the crash. The dragons would use their remaining strength to keep the shelter warm and maintain a signal beacon made from their ship's emergency equipment. When Marcus reached the buried vessel, he would activate his emergency transmitter, a short-range device that should be powerful enough to reach the shelter across 2 kilometers. Silas would then fly to his location, following the transmitter signal. The dragon's natural heat would protect Marcus from freezing during the flight back, and together they would return with whatever thermal cores or heating equipment they could salvage. It wasn't a perfect plan. There were dozens of ways it could go wrong. But, as the storm continued to rage outside their small shelter, as Veltar's breathing grew more labored and the other dragons moved more slowly, Marcus knew they were running out of alternatives. There is something else, Lymel said quietly as they finalized their preparations. Something you should know about our ship. What? The dragons exchanged those subtle glances again, and Marcus sensed he was about to learn something important. The Flame of Zephyros was not merely an exploration vessel, Karoth said slowly. We were carrying passengers. Refugees from a disaster on one of our colony worlds. There were 300 Zephyrani aboard when we crashed. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. 300? Where are they now? The passenger compartments were designed with emergency stasis systems, Jackson explained. If the ship's power failed, the systems would automatically place all passengers in suspended animation to preserve life as long as possible. They should still be alive, but their stasis chambers require the thermal cores to maintain safe temperatures. How long can they survive without power? Perhaps a month, Silas said grimly. It has been 3 weeks since the crash. Marcus stared at the dragons, understanding now why they had been so eager to entertain his seemingly impossible plan. This wasn't just about saving 5 lives. If they could restore power to the Flame of Zephyros, they might be able to save 300. The stakes had just become much higher, and the mission much more critical. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders like a physical burden. 300 lives depending on his ability to cross 2 kilometers of frozen wasteland and jury-rig alien technology to work in conditions it was never designed for. Why didn't you tell me this before? He asked. Because we feared you might attempt the journey before the storm cleared, Veltar whispered, her voice growing weaker. Desperation makes beings do foolish things. We needed you to plan carefully, to think it through. The passengers have waited 3 weeks. They can wait a few more days for the weather to improve. Marcus nodded, understanding their logic. If he'd known about the 300 passengers from the beginning, he might indeed have tried to make the journey during the storm, getting himself killed in the process and dooming everyone. Is there anything else I should know? He asked. Any other surprises that might affect the mission? The thermal cores are located in the engineering section, Lymel explained. The section is heavily shielded and should have survived the crash intact. However, the cores are designed to be removed only by trained engineers using proper equipment. You will need to improvise. What's the worst that could happen if I do it wrong? The cores could overload and explode with the force of a small nuclear weapon, Karoth said matter-of-factly. Or they could simply fail to function. Or they could work perfectly but prove impossible to transport. Marcus laughed despite himself. Is there anything about this mission that isn't potentially fatal? The flight back with Silas, Jackson said. That should be nearly terrifying. For the first time in days, Marcus heard something like humor in the dragon's voice, and he realized that despite their alien nature, despite the vast differences between their species, they had formed a genuine bond during their weeks together. They weren't just fellow survivors anymore, they were friends facing an impossible situation together. When do you think the storm will break? Marcus asked, checking his instruments. Soon, Silas replied, tilting his great head toward the ceiling as if listening to something Marcus couldn't hear. The pressure is changing. The winds will die down within a day, perhaps two. Marcus nodded and began gathering the equipment he would need for the journey. Cold weather clothing made from insulation salvaged from both ships. Navigation equipment cobbled together from functional components. Tools that might be useful for removing thermal cores from alien engineering systems. Emergency rations and water that would have to last for what could be a very long round trip. As he worked, he became aware that the dragons were watching him with expressions he had learned to read over their weeks together. There was hope there, yes, but also something else. Something that took him a moment to identify. Respect. They were looking at him with respect. It occurred to Marcus that in their eyes, he was about to attempt something that their own people would consider impossible. A being from a cold world, adapted for survival in conditions that would kill them, preparing to venture into hostile territory to save lives. From their perspective, he probably seemed as impossibly brave and capable as they seemed to him. Marcus, Veltar called softly, her voice now barely above a whisper. Come here. He approached the dying dragon carefully, mindful of her still dangerous plasma breath. Even weakened, she could easily kill him by accident. I want you to know, she said, her ancient eyes fixing on his, that regardless of the outcome of your mission, you have given us something precious in these final days. What's that? Hope. Your species speaks of impossible things as if they were merely difficult. You look at problems and see solutions where we see only obstacles. This is a gift, Marcus, of the humans. Even if you fail tomorrow, you have shown us that failure is not inevitable until the moment we stop trying. Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. I'm not going to fail, he said quietly. I'm going to bring back those thermal cores, we're going to save the passengers, and we're all going to survive this. How can you be so certain? Marcus smiled, thinking of the countless human explorers, inventors, and dreamers who had faced similar impossible odds throughout history. Because that's what humans do. We survive. We adapt. We find a way. And we never, ever give up on our friends. The storm raged on outside, but inside the small shelter, something had changed. The air of resignation was gone, replaced by determination. Marcus continued his preparations while the dragons conserved their strength for the trials ahead. Tomorrow, or the day after, he would venture out into the frozen wasteland to attempt a rescue that defied all logic and probability. 300 lives hung in the balance, along with his own and those of his unlikely companions. But, for the first time since the crash, Marcusjan felt genuinely hopeful about their chances. After all, humans had been doing impossible things for millennia. This would just be one more for the history books. The storm broke on the fourth day, just as Silas had predicted. Marcus woke to an eerie silence that made his ears ring after weeks of constant wind. Pale sunlight filtered through the shelter's small windows, revealing a landscape transformed by the blizzard. Snowdrifts towered 15 feet high in some places, while other areas had been scoured down to the bare ice by the relentless winds. Marcus checked his equipment one final time while the dragons gathered around him. Veltar had managed to rise for the occasion, though her movements were painfully slow and her breathing labored. The sight of her struggle strengthened Marcus's resolve. Every hour mattered now. The path will be treacherous, Korath warned, studying the changed landscape through the windows. The storm has shifted the terrain significantly. Landmarks that existed before may now be buried or altered. I have the navigation beacon from your ship, Marcus replied, tapping the alien device strapped to his wrist. As long as it's still transmitting, I can find the crash site. He'd spent hours learning to read the Zephyrani navigation system, with Thymel patiently explaining the symbols and indicators. The device was remarkably sophisticated, using a combination of magnetic field detection, gravitational sensors, and something the dragons called thermal mapping that could detect heat signatures through solid matter. "Remember," Jackson said, "the thermal cores will be extremely heavy. Each core weighs approximately what you would call 200 pounds. They are designed to be moved by beings of our size and strength." "I've got it figured out," Marcus assured him, though privately he wondered if his plan would actually work. He'd fashioned a crude sled from debris and equipped it with improvised runners made from pieces of the station's metal framework. The theory was sound: if he could get the cores onto the sled, he could drag them across the ice rather than trying to carry them. "The engineering section is located in the ship's central hull," Lymel explained for the 100th time. "The thermal cores are in sealed chambers marked with red symbols that look like this." She traced a complex pattern in the frost on the floor. "Each core has manual release mechanisms, but they require a specific sequence to activate safely." Marcus nodded, reviewing the sequence in his mind. The Zephyrani engineering systems were elegantly designed but completely different from human technology. Instead of simple switches and buttons, they used pressure-sensitive plates that had to be activated in precise patterns. One mistake could trigger safety lockouts that would make the cores impossible to remove. "And if the automated systems are still running?" Marcus asked. "Then, you must convince them you are authorized to remove the cores," Silas replied. "We have taught you the basic command phrases in our language. The computer will respond to voice commands if the vocal recognition systems are functional." Marcus had spent days learning to produce the complex sounds of the Zephyrani language. His human vocal cords couldn't replicate the full range of their communication, but he could manage the basic technical commands needed for the mission. At least, he hoped he could. The dragons assured him his pronunciation was adequate, but he suspected they were being polite. "What about the passengers?" Marcus asked. "If I can get power restored to the ship, should I try to wake them up?" "No," Veltar said firmly. "The stasis systems are delicate. Attempting to revive passengers without proper medical support could kill them. Simply restore power and ensure the thermal cores are functioning. We will handle revival procedures once we have a stable heat source." Marcus sealed his improvised cold weather suit and checked his equipment one final time. He'd layered every piece of insulation he could find, creating a bulky but hopefully effective protection against the brutal cold. His breath misted in the frigid air even inside the shelter, and he knew the temperature outside was well below anything a human was meant to survive. "How long do you estimate for the round trip?" Korath asked. 6 hours if everything goes perfectly," Marcus replied. 12 hours if I encounter problems. If I'm not back in 24 hours, assume I failed and conserve your strength." "We will not give up on you so easily," Silas said. "If you do not return, I will come looking for you." Marcus smiled at the dragon's fierce loyalty. Over their weeks together, he'd come to understand that despite their fearsome appearance, the Zephyrani were deeply emotional beings who formed strong bonds with their companions. They had adopted him into their group as surely as if he were one of their own species. "Just be ready for the pickup," Marcus said. "When I signal, I'll need you to reach me as quickly as possible. I'll be burning through my body heat reserves during the work inside the ship, and I may not have much left for the flight back." He stepped outside into the bitter wind, feeling the cold hit him like a physical blow even through his protective gear. The landscape was alien and beautiful in its harshness, rolling fields of pristine white snow broken by jutting spires of blue-black ice. In the distance, the gas giant Kepler 442b hung in the pale sky like a massive jewel, its storm bands clearly visible. The beacon on his wrist showed a steady signal from the crashed ship, bearing roughly northwest and distant just over 2 kilometers. Marcus oriented himself and began the long trek across the frozen wasteland. The first hour was deceptively easy. The snow was crusted hard enough to support his weight in most places, and he made good time following the subtle depression that marked the ship's crash trajectory. The beacon's signal grew stronger with each step, confirming he was on the right course. The second hour brought the first real challenges. The storm had carved deep channels in the ice, some of them hidden beneath deceptive snow bridges that collapsed under his weight. Marcus found himself waist-deep in powder snow several times, burning precious energy fighting his way back to solid ground. Worse, the cold was beginning to penetrate his improvised insulation. His fingers grew numb despite his gloves, and his face ached where the freezing air touched exposed skin. He forced himself to maintain a steady pace, knowing that stopping to rest would only make the cold worse. By the third hour, Marcus could see his destination. The flame of Zephyros had carved a massive trench in the ice during its crash landing, and the ship itself was partially visible as a dark bulk beneath the snow and ice that had fallen into the excavation. It was enormous, easily 5 times the size of his own vessel, and, even buried as it was, Marcus could see hints of the elegant curves and organic design that characterized Zephyrani technology. Getting down to the ship proved to be another challenge. The walls of the crash trench were steep and slick with ice, and Marcus had to lower himself carefully using a rope made from strips of fabric. More than once, his feet slipped on the treacherous surface, leaving him dangling helplessly until he could find new footing. Finally, he stood on the ship's hull, looking for an entry point. The impact had cracked the outer shell in several places, creating openings large enough for a human to squeeze through. Marcus chose the largest crack and began working his way inside the vessel. The interior of the flame of Zephyros was like nothing he'd ever seen. The walls curved in organic patterns that seemed to flow like living tissue, and, even in the dim light from his flashlight, Marcus could see traces of the beautiful artwork that decorated the ship. The Zephyrani clearly valued beauty as much as function in their designs. Navigation proved difficult in the winding corridors of the alien ship. The deck plans Thymel had shown him made sense in theory, but the reality of moving through the tilted, partially collapsed vessel was much more challenging. Several passages were blocked by debris or ice, forcing him to find alternate routes. The cold inside the ship was even worse than outside. Without the dragon's body heat, the temperature had dropped to levels that made his emergency thermometer simply red extreme cold. His breath formed instant clouds of ice crystals, and he could feel his body heat bleeding away despite his insulation. Finally, after nearly an hour of searching, Marcus found the engineering section. The heavy doors were sealed, but the manual override still functioned. As the massive portal slid open, he was relieved to find that this section of the ship had survived the crash relatively intact. The thermal cores were exactly where Thymel had said they would be, 6 cylindrical units housed in individual chambers along the far wall. Each core was about 4 feet tall and 2 feet in diameter, made of some dark metal that seemed to absorb light. Even powered down and cold, they radiated an aura of barely contained energy. Marcus approached the first core and began the removal sequence he'd memorized. His numb fingers fumbled with the alien controls, but gradually the seals disengaged and the core became accessible. The hard part would be getting it out of its mounting and onto his improvised sled. Working with the cores was like wrestling with solid blocks of lead. Each one was incredibly dense, and moving them even a few inches required all of Marcus's strength. Worse, the metal was so cold it burned his skin even through his gloves. He had to work in short bursts, warming his hands against his body between efforts. The first core took him nearly 30 minutes to extract and load onto his sled. The second took longer as his strength began to fade and the cold sapped his coordination. By the time he'd loaded the third core, Marcus knew he was approaching his limits. His body was burning through its heat reserves, and he could feel the early stages of hypothermia beginning to set in. But 3 cores might be enough. According to the dragons, each core could provide heat for their entire group for weeks. 3 cores could power the passenger compartments and keep everyone alive until rescue arrived. Marcus activated his emergency transmitter, sending the signal that would call Silas to him. Then, he began the careful process of dragging his sled back through the ship toward the entry point. The added weight made every step a struggle, and several times he had to stop and rest, feeling his body temperature drop dangerously low. Getting the sled up and out of the crash trench proved to be the greatest challenge yet. The rope and pulley system he'd rigged barely functioned under the weight, and Marcus had to make 3 separate trips to get all the cores to the surface. By the time he finished, his hands were so numb he could barely feel them, and his legs shook with exhaustion. He lay in the snow next to his precious cargo, scanning the sky for any sign of Silas. The dragon should have received his signal by now, but the distance was considerable, and flying in the thin, cold atmosphere would be difficult even for a being adapted for flight. Marcus began to worry as minutes passed without any sign of his rescuer. The cold was winning its war against his body's defenses, and he knew he didn't have much time left. His thinking was becoming sluggish, and he had to fight the urge to simply lie down in the snow and rest. Then, he saw it, a dark shape moving against the pale sky, growing larger with each passing second. Silas was coming, his powerful wings beating steadily as he fought against the thin air and bitter wind. The dragon looked magnificent in flight, every inch the mythical creature that had inspired human legends for millennia. The landing was rougher than Marcus had hoped. Silas hit the snow hard, skidding several yards before coming to a stop. The dragon was clearly exhausted from the flight, his breathing labored and his scales dulled by the cold. "Did you succeed?" Silas asked, his voice barely audible over the wind that was beginning to pick up again. 3 cores, Marcus managed through chattering teeth. "Should be enough." Loading the thermal cores onto Silas proved to be another monumental task. The dragon's natural body heat was wonderful for warming Marcus, but the cores had to be secured carefully to avoid shifting during flight. They used cargo netting salvaged from the ship to create a secure harness, with Marcus riding behind the cores to keep them stable. The takeoff was terrifying. Silas struggled to gain altitude with the massive additional weight, and, for a few heart-stopping moments, Marcus thought they were going to crash back into the snow. But, gradually the dragon's powerful wings lifted them into the sky, and they began the flight back to the shelter. Flying with the dragon was unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced. Despite the cold wind whipping around them, Silas's body heat kept him from freezing, and the view from Dragonback was spectacular. The moon's landscape stretched out below them like an alien wonderland, all crystalline formations and geometric patterns carved by wind and ice. But the flight was also exhausting for Silas. Marcus could feel the dragon's strength flagging as they approached the shelter, and the final approach was more of a controlled crash than a proper landing. They hit the snow hard enough to jar Marcus's teeth, but the important thing was that they had made it. The other dragons rushed out to help as soon as they saw the approaching figures. Even Veltar managed to leave the shelter, though she moved with obvious difficulty. Together, they carried the precious thermal cores inside and began the process of connecting them to the shelter's power systems. "These are industrial-grade cores," Korath observed as he examined their hull. "More powerful than what we had hoped to retrieve. One of these alone could power our environmental systems for months." "Will they work with the shelter's systems?" Marcus asked, finally, allowing himself to collapse in exhaustion. "With some modifications, yes," Thymel replied, her engineering expertise coming to the fore. "The power output systems are standard across our technology. Give me a few hours, and I can have these integrated with both the shelter and our ship's emergency systems." As warmth began to return to the shelter, powered by the thermal cores Marcus had risked his life to retrieve, the dragons turned their attention to their buried ship. Using the shelter's communication equipment, they established contact with the Flame of Zephyros' computer systems and began the process of remotely reactivating the passenger compartments. "Life signs are stable across all stasis chambers," Jackson reported, monitoring the readouts. "All 300 passengers are alive and in stable suspension. The cores you retrieved have provided enough power to maintain their systems indefinitely." Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him. They had done it. Against all odds, using improvised equipment and sheer determination, they had managed to save not just themselves but 300 innocent lives. "What about rescue?" Marcus asked. "Can you send a distress signal now that you have power?" "Already done," Silas replied with what Marcus had learned to recognize as a dragon smile. "The emergency beacon is transmitting on all Zephyrani emergency frequencies. Help should arrive within 2 weeks. And the passengers? Will remain in stasis until proper medical facilities are available," Veltar said. Her voice was stronger now, warming along with the shelter. "Stasis is safer than revival under these conditions." As the day wore on and the shelter grew genuinely warm for the first time in weeks, Marcus found himself reflecting on what they had accomplished. When he'd first crashed on this frozen moon, survival had seemed impossible. When he'd met the dragons, their combined survival had seemed even more unlikely. But here they were, human and alien, working together, having achieved the impossible through cooperation and determination. It was a story that would be told throughout the galaxy, Marcus suspected. The tale of how beings from two completely different worlds had found a way to survive and save lives in the face of overwhelming odds. Marcus, Karoth said, interrupting his thoughts. There is something we must discuss. What's that? When rescue arrives, they will want to know how this was accomplished. How a single human managed to save not just 5 Zephyrini, but 300 passengers as well. Marcus shrugged. I'll tell them the truth. We worked together. I couldn't have done any of it without all of you. Yes, but they will want to understand how your species approaches impossible situations. This will be studied, analyzed, perhaps even taught in our academies. What do you want me to tell them? Veltar spoke up, her ancient voice carrying the weight of wisdom. Tell them that humans do not accept the word impossible. Tell them that when faced with certain death, you choose to fight rather than surrender. Tell them that your species sees problems as puzzles to be solved rather than obstacles to be accepted. Marcus nodded slowly. I can do that. But, also tell them this, Silas added. Tell them that even the most determined human cannot succeed alone. Tell them that the greatest achievements come from beings of different worlds working together, each contributing their unique strengths to overcome challenges that no single species could face. Looking around at his unlikely companions, Marcus smiled. That, he said, will be the easiest part of the story to tell. Outside, the wind was beginning to pick up again, but, inside their warm shelter, powered by alien technology and heated by the bonds of friendship forged across species lines, Marcus and the dragons settled in to wait for rescue. They had beaten the impossible odds. They had saved 300 lives. And they had proven that when beings of good will work together, there was no challenge too great to overcome. It was, Marcus thought, exactly the kind of story that made the galaxy a better place. The rescue ships arrived exactly 12 days after Marcus had retrieved the thermal cores, appearing in the system like metallic stars against the black of space. The first vessel to reach them was a massive Zephyrini medical frigate, designed specifically for evacuation operations. Behind it came 2 more ships, a human diplomatic vessel and a Zephyrini military cruiser. Marcus watched through the shelter's reinforced windows as the rescue craft descended through the thin atmosphere, their engines cutting bright lines through the pale sky. The medical frigate was a thing of beauty, its hull shaped like a flower with petals that could unfold to reveal sophisticated surgical and treatment facilities. The human ship was more utilitarian, all clean lines and efficient design. The military vessel looked exactly what it was, a predator built for war but pressed into service for mercy. They made good time, Karoth observed, his massive form filling much of the shelter's main room. The dragon looked healthier than he had in weeks, his scales bright with renewed vitality thanks to the thermal cores that now powered their life support systems. The distress signal included notification of human involvement, Imel explained. This has become what your people would call a diplomatic incident, though a positive one. Both our governments are very interested in the details of our cooperation. Marcus wasn't sure he liked the sound of that. Over the past 12 days, he'd told and retold the story of their survival so many times that it was starting to feel rehearsed. But, he supposed that was inevitable. A human and 5 aliens working together to save 300 lives was the kind of story that would capture imaginations across the galaxy. The rescue process began immediately upon landing. The medical frigate disgorged teams of Zephyrini technicians who quickly established a heated corridor between their ship and the buried flame of Zephyros. Within hours, they had begun the delicate process of reviving the passengers from stasis and transferring them to proper medical facilities. Marcus found himself assigned to the human diplomatic vessel, though he was allowed to visit his dragon companions as often as he wished. The human ship's medical bay was a stark contrast to the Zephyrini facilities, all white surfaces and precise instruments, where the alien ship featured organic curves and living walls that seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat. Captain Chen, said Ambassador Sarah Martinez, the lead human diplomat. I've been asked to debrief you on the events of the past month. Your actions here have attracted significant attention from both human and Zephyrini leadership. Marcus sat in the ambassador's private office, a cup of real coffee warming his hands for the first time in weeks. The luxury of hot beverages and climate control felt almost surreal after his time on the ice. What kind of attention? Marcus asked warily. The good kind, Martinez assured him. Both governments are interested in understanding how this cooperation came about and whether it might serve as a model for future joint operations. Humans and Zephyrani have maintained cordial relations for decades, but actual collaboration has been rare. Through the office's viewport, Marcus could see teams of workers carefully extracting Zephyrani passengers from the crashed ship. Each passenger was handled with extreme care, their massive forms supported by anti-gravity stretchers as they were moved to the medical facilities. Even after weeks in stasis, the dragons were magnificent beings, their scales catching the light as they were carried to safety.
How are they doing?
Marcus asked, nodding toward the rescue operation.
Remarkably well, considering the circumstances, Martinez replied.
The chief medical officer says that your quick action with the thermal cores prevented any serious medical complications. A few more days without heat, and they would have started losing passengers to hypothermia-induced organ failure. Marcus nodded, though privately he shuddered at how close they had come to disaster. If the storm had lasted another week, if Silas hadn't been able to make the flight, if the thermal cores had been damaged, there were so many points where everything could have gone wrong. Tell me about the dragons you worked with, Martinez continued.
How did you establish communication? How did you coordinate the rescue effort?
For the next several hours, Marcus recounted the entire story once again.
Martinez was a skilled interviewer, asking probing questions that drew out details he hadn't considered important. How had they established trust? What challenges had they faced in communicating across species lines? How had they resolved conflicts over strategy and resource allocation?
What impressed me most, Marcus said as he concluded his account, was their willingness to trust me with their people's lives. Think about it, I'm an alien to them, from a completely different biological and technological background. But, when I proposed the desperate plan to reach their ship, they didn't hesitate to put everything on the line. And, you didn't hesitate to risk your life for 300 beings you'd never met, Martinez observed.
Marcus shrugged. It was the right thing to do. Captain, I don't think you fully understand what you've accomplished here. This isn't just a rescue story.
It's a demonstration that our species can work together in ways we've never attempted before. You've shown that human adaptability and determination can complement Zephyrani's strength and technology to achieve results that neither species could manage alone. Later that day, Marcus was invited to the Zephyrani medical frigate to visit with his companions. The alien ship's interior was kept at temperatures that would have been lethal to humans, so he wore a full environmental suit for the visit. Even so, the heat was oppressive, and he found himself grateful for the suit's cooling systems. The 5 dragons had been given a large chamber near the ship's center, a space that could accommodate their massive forms while providing the high temperatures they needed for optimal health. When Marcus entered, all 5 rose to greet him, a gesture of respect that he'd learned was significant in their culture. Marcus, my friend, Veltar said, her voice strong and clear for the first time since he'd known her. The ancient dragon's scales gleamed with renewed health, and her plasma breath created small auroras in the chamber's thick atmosphere. I wanted to thank you properly before we part ways.
We're not parting ways, Marcus protested. Ambassador Martinez says there are going to be follow-up meetings, joint studies, probably more cooperation between our species.
Yes, Korath rumbled, but this particular moment in time will never come again.
We wanted you to know how much it has meant to us.
Jackson stepped forward, carrying something in his massive claws.
We have prepared something for you. A gift, in the tradition of our people.
The object was a small sculpture carved from what looked like crystallized plasma, a substance Marcus didn't even know existed. It depicted a human figure standing beside a dragon, both looking up at the stars. The craftsmanship was exquisite, capturing not just the physical forms but somehow conveying the sense of partnership and mutual respect that had developed between them. It's beautiful, Marcus said, accepting the gift carefully.
But, I should be giving gifts to you.
You saved my life as much as I saved yours. That is exactly why this gift is appropriate, Silas said.
It represents mutual salvation, mutual respect.
In our culture, such gifts are only exchanged between beings who have shared life-threatening experiences and emerged as true companions. Thymel spoke up, her golden-flecked scales catching the chamber's warm light.
There is something else.
The passengers you helped save, they have requested to meet you. Would you be willing? Marcus nodded, and they moved to the ship's main passenger bay. 300 Zephyrani filled the vast space, their combined body heat making the chamber feel like the heart of a volcano. Despite his environmental suit, Marcus felt sweat beading on his forehead. As he entered, an extraordinary thing happened. All 300 dragons lowered their great heads in unison, a gesture of profound respect that Karath quickly explained was reserved for the highest honors in their society. They know what you did, Veltar whispered. They know that a small human risked everything to save their lives. You have become legend among our people, Marcus Chen. One of the passengers, an elderly dragon with scales that had faded to silver with age, approached him. Human, she said in carefully pronounced Standard Galactic, my name is Elder Zarathul. I speak for all passengers of the Flame of Zephyros. We wish to know, what can our people give you in return for our lives? Marcus looked out at the sea of alien faces, all watching him with expressions of curiosity and gratitude. These were beings he had never met, whose names he would never learn, whose lives he had saved through a desperate gamble in the frozen wastes of an unnamed moon. You've already given me everything I could want, he said finally. You've shown me that differences between species don't matter when it comes to doing what's right. You've proven that beings from different worlds can become family if they're willing to trust each other. Elder Zarathul tilted her massive head, studying him with ancient eyes. You speak wisdom, small one. But wisdom should be rewarded with more than words. Then, let me ask for something, Marcus said, an idea forming. Not for me, but for both our species. Let this be the beginning of real cooperation between humans and Zephyrani. Let our governments work together to explore the galaxy, to help other beings in distress, to show that different species can accomplish incredible things when they combine their strengths. A rumble of approval went through the gathered dragons, a sound like distant thunder that Marcus felt in his bones. This shall be done, Elder Zarathul declared. I speak with the authority of the Colonial Council. The Zephyrani hegemony will propose formal alliance protocols with the Human Federation. This rescue shall be remembered as the first chapter of a new age of cooperation. The formal ceremonies took place 3 days later, aboard the human diplomatic vessel. Representatives from both governments had arrived via FTL communications relay, their holographic forms flickering slightly but their words carrying the full weight of official policy. Marcus found himself standing between Ambassador Martinez and Elder Zarathul as they signed the preliminary cooperation accords. The documents were modest in scope: joint exploration missions, shared emergency response protocols, cultural exchange programs, but they represented something unprecedented in galactic politics. Captain Chen, said Prime Minister Harrison, the human head of government, his hologram shimmering as he spoke across the light years, your actions on that frozen moon have opened possibilities we never imagined. You've shown that humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology or our military power, it's our ability to see potential allies where others see only aliens. High Chancellor Velmorith, the Zephyrani leader, spoke next. Young human, your willingness to risk everything for beings you barely knew has reminded our people that courage and honor are not limited to any single species. You have given us a new understanding of what cooperation between peoples can achieve. The signing ceremony was followed by a celebration that lasted long into the ship's night cycle. Humans and Zephyrani mingled freely, sharing stories and learning about each other's cultures. Despite the temperature differences that required careful environmental controls, the atmosphere was warm with genuine friendship and mutual respect. Marcus found himself in the ship's observation lounge with his 5 dragon companions, looking out at the stars while the celebration continued around them. The frozen moon below them looked peaceful in the starlight, giving no hint of the desperate struggle that had taken place on its surface. Do you think it will work? Marcus asked. This alliance between our peoples? If it is built on the foundation you have provided, yes, Karath replied. You have shown that cooperation is possible even under the most desperate circumstances. You have proven that trust between species can exist. What will you do now? Marcus asked. Return to Zephyros to report on our exploration mission, Thymel said. But, we have requested assignment to the new joint exploration program. If it is approved, we may be working together again soon. Silas stretched his wings, the gesture somehow conveying contentment. And you, Marcus? Will you join this new program?
Marcus considered the question. His original mission was complete, the cargo he'd been carrying was lost with his ship, but the emergency evacuation of a Federation research station had been successful. Officially, he was free to return to Earth and request a new assignment. "I think I will," he said finally. "After everything we've been through together, normal cargo runs seem pretty boring." Veltar laughed, a sound like gentle thunder that warmed the room. "I believe, Marcus Chen, that you will find there is no such thing as normal when humans and dragons work together." As if to prove her point, an alert chimed through the ship's communication system. Ambassador Martinez's voice followed immediately. "All senior personnel to the bridge. We've received a distress signal from the Kepler 447 system. A colony ship carrying mixed human and alien populations has suffered catastrophic engine failure. They're requesting immediate assistance." Marcus looked at his dragon companions and saw his own thoughts reflected in their ancient eyes. Here, already, was an opportunity to put their new partnership to the test. "Well," Marcus said, rising to his feet, "I suppose we should go see how we can help." As they made their way to the bridge, Marcus reflected on the changes the past month had brought. He'd crashed on an alien moon expecting to die alone. Instead, he'd found friends, saved lives, and helped forge a new alliance between species. More than that, he'd discovered that the universe was full of possibilities he'd never imagined. The galaxy was vast and dangerous, filled with countless worlds where beings struggled against impossible odds. But it was also full of opportunities for cooperation, understanding, and mutual aid. With humans and Zeffirani working together, Marcus thought, there might be hope for everyone who faced the kind of desperate situation he'd found himself in. The bridge was bustling with activity when they arrived. The main screen showed a tactical display of the Kepler 447 system, with a blinking red icon marking the location of the disabled colony ship. Initial sensor readings indicated several thousand lives at risk. "How long do they have?" Marcus asked. 18 hours before their life support fails completely, the navigation officer reported. The nearest Federation vessel is 3 days away at maximum speed. Ambassador Martinez turned to look at the mixed group of humans and dragons that had assembled on the bridge. "Well, people, it looks like we have our first official mission. Are you ready to show the galaxy what human Zeffirani cooperation can accomplish?" Marcus looked around at his companions, 5 ancient dragons who had become closer than family, human diplomats and military officers ready to risk everything for strangers, and himself, a simple cargo pilot who had somehow become a symbol of interspecies friendship. "Let's go save some lives," he said. The ships changed course for Kepler 447, carrying with them the hopes of 2 civilizations and the promise of a galaxy where no one would have to face impossible odds alone. Behind them, the frozen moon continued its silent orbit, but it was no longer a place of death and desperation. It had become the birthplace of a new age of cooperation among the stars. And, in the years that followed, when beings throughout the galaxy spoke of the moment when humanity and the dragon-like Zeffirani first proved that different species could work together to overcome any challenge, they would always begin the story the same way. It started on a frozen moon, where a human named Marcus Chen refused to let his alien friends die.